Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Lee, and I'm Vice President of Government Affairs at Farm Journal Foundation. We're very excited to host today's virtual panel discussion and launch of the Farm Journal Foundation Commission policy paper by Dr. Thom Jayne titled Farmers on the Front Lines, How U.S. Investments in Climate Adaptation for Smallholders Can Support Global Food Security. Farm Journal Foundation has organized and sponsored this event. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works with farmers and other stakeholders from across the global food system to educate and advocate on how innovative agriculture can solve some of the world's biggest challenges, from global hunger to malnutrition to climate change. On the heels of COP27, and as this paper demonstrates, we know just how important it will be for all of us to focus on the issue of climate change, particularly how it will increasingly impact smallholder farmers across the globe and how those farmers will need tools and other support to adapt accordingly. Our program today will include a brief presentation from Dr. Jayne on his policy paper, followed by a virtual panel discussion moderated by Dr. Jayne that will include several esteemed panelists with deep expertise on these issues. Our panelists include Ann Vaughan, Dr. Kofi Boa, and Deissy Martínez-Barón. I will briefly introduce our speakers now. Dr. Thom Jayne, our author and moderator, is the University Foundation Professor Emeritus of Agricultural, Food, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. He is a fellow of the Agricultural and Applied Economics Association and a distinguished fellow of the African Association of Agricultural Economists. His work spans numerous topics, including food marketing and price policies, changes in land use patterns, sustainable intensification, employment and rural transformation. He has mentored dozens of young African professionals and played a major role in building Michigan State University's partnerships with African agricultural policy research institutes. Thom is the adjunct professor at the Indaba Agricultural Policy Research Institute in Lusaka, Zambia, a board member of the Regional Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institutes in Eastern and Southern Africa, and was a founding co-director of the Alliance for African Partnership at Michigan State University. In 2017, he became the flagship co-leader of the CGIAR Policies, Institutions, and Markets Research Program on economy-wide factors affecting agricultural growth and rural transformation. In 2019, Jayne was seconded to the African Development Bank, serving as a special advisor to the president. Ann Vaughan serves the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, Bureau for Resilience and Food Security, as a senior advisor for climate change. The Bureau addresses some of the most critical issues facing the world today, including advancing inclusive agriculture-led growth, resilience, nutrition, and water security, sanitation, and hygiene. All of these sectors are impacted by climate change, but are also critical components for the solution to help communities adapt to and mitigate against climate change. Ann has had a distinguished career working in the nonprofit and public sector, including a stint on Capitol Hill. Dr. Kofi Boa studied agricultural science at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, and agronomy at the University of Nebraska. Early in his career, he worked as an on-farm research scientist at the Crops Research Institute of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in Ghana. In 2012, Kofi established the Center for No-Till Agriculture in Ghana's Ashanti region. His current work is deeply centered on hands-on education, and the center maintains a demonstration farm and training facilities where farmers learn about soil health and gain hands-on experience using no-till techniques with mulch, cover crops, intercropping, and minimal use of chemical and synthetic fertilizer. Deissy Martínez-Barón is the regional program leader for the CGIAR research program on climate change, agriculture, and food security in Latin America, based in Cali, Colombia. She plays a major role in regional partnership development aimed to build impact pathways so that knowledge in climate change leads to more competitive and resilient agriculture in Latin America. She leads the program's research portfolio in the region, aiming to bring more climate services into decision-making processes, informing policies and priorities with gender-sensitive, climate-smart agriculture, and increasing evidence on low-carbon and more resilient agricultural options in the region. I'm looking forward to this discussion, and audience members should feel free to put forward questions in the chat, and if time allows, we'll try to bring those into the discussion. Thanks again to all of you for joining us today, and I will now go off video and turn things over to our moderator, Dr. Thom Jayne.
Great, thank you, Katie. I'd like to thank Farm Journal Foundation for inviting me to prepare this review paper on adaptation. How can smallholder farmers be encouraged and supported to adapt to climate changes in agriculture. I must say that this, of my 33 years as a professor, this paper was the one that was most frightening to me after I took stock of the sense of urgency that I got after this review. Hopefully that'll seep through in the presentation. Let's go to the next slide, please. The very first point that I think came out of this review is that even though the global food system is remarkable in many ways in its ability to feed the world and this growing population, there are aspects of it that are unsustainable. First thing is that food systems are a very large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, accounting for, according to COP27, now 33% of greenhouse gas emissions from global food systems. Agriculture alone accounts for 70% of the world's freshwater use. 25% of the globe's cultivated land is getting degraded. In places like sub-Saharan Africa, it's rising. It's over 30%, and just attesting to the lack of sustainability in the status quo. Conversion of forests and grasslands to farmland is happening at a very rapid pace in many parts of the world, Latin America and Africa. And this is a major cause of the loss of biodiversity and loss of natural capital. So, as put by the Global Panel on Agriculture and Food Systems for Nutrition, there is a very substantial risk that the world will irreversibly cross multiple planetary boundaries as a direct outcome of current agriculture and food systems practices. If we really just take stock of that, I think it will focus our minds about how urgent it is that we act fast and get things put in place immediately to respond to this challenge. Next slide, please. So there are 5 key findings of this report. It's about 30 pages, and I would encourage you to, I won't be able to hit the details, but just the high points for now. First one is just the unsustainability of the status quo, and that decisive action is required now. The second point is that climate change interacts in so many ways with population growth and rising incomes, and it's just creating a whole sort of synergistic range of additional challenges that go beyond extreme weather and loss of pollinators, loss of forests, greater spread of human and animal and plant diseases as temperatures change in parts of the world. There's just a whole plethora of challenges that are associated with climate change beyond drought and floods. Third point, smallholder farmers are particularly vulnerable to climate change. And for that reason, I think the report focuses on what can be done to support smallholder farmers, millions of smallholder farmers around the world, to deal with climate change. The fourth issue is that climate change is heightening the need for international water management arrangements. And an example of this is the current conflict happening between Egypt and Ethiopia about Ethiopia's decision to dam up the Nile River and the kind of issues that's bringing, including conflict. Fifth issue is that raising the productivity of land that's already under cultivation has the greatest prospects of helping to move towards a sustainable trajectory for agri-food systems. Right now, in many parts of the world, including Africa and Latin America, there's an unprecedented increase in the conversion of forest and grasslands and wetlands into agriculture, and that has a huge cost to it. So the real challenge, or one of the major challenges, is to increase yields and increase the productivity on existing land as the way to meet the additional food needs of the globe. In places like Africa, the food demand is going to double in about 35 years. And it's right now the approach to meeting those demands is to just put more area under cultivation, but that is not a tenable long-term arrangement. Next slide, please. So this slide really talks about the how part of improving productivity on existing farmland. Let's just take stock of where does yield growth happen from? How does it occur? Yield growth happens from technical innovation. And this isn't necessarily technical innovation occurring in laboratories in gene science and seed improvements, but it's also the synergy between farmers on the one side with the knowledge that they bring and scientists on the other side who are working on improved agronomic and soil management practices, how to improve yield response to fertilizers, how to improve soil fertility. So it's this kind of co-creation between farmers and scientists. And of course, the system that links them is the extension systems. So this really illustrates the centrality of getting good farm extension systems and good science, crop science and animal science on this side, in order to sort of develop these synergies that will result in more sustainable management practices that can do three things. One is improve soil health so that long-run ecological regenerative agricultural practices can now kind of come into greater prevalence for smallholder farmers. The second one is getting greater output from existing farmland or ag productivity growth. And then the third is climate resilience. So it's a tall challenge that we're putting on agricultural R&D systems to do all three things simultaneously: improve soil health, get more output on existing land, and do it in a way that makes farmers more resilient to more variable weather patterns. All right, next slide, please. So the priority areas and recommendations for the report, coming out of the report, are how to make R&D systems work better for smallholder farmers. And that includes the international CG system, international universities, and so forth, on the one side, and then the national and regional systems in developing countries. So agricultural R&D has consistently been shown to generate the highest impacts on agricultural growth and rural poverty reduction of all types of public ag expenditure. So the evidence is pretty overwhelming that investments in ag R&D have high payoffs. So we're recommending that long-term core US government support for both the CGIAR and Feed the Future Innovation Lab systems that address climate adaptation should be continued, but they should put greater weight on ensuring that the funds to the CGIAR and innovation labs directly strengthen the capacity of national partner agricultural institutions in developing countries. In places like sub-Saharan Africa, there's a long way to go on this. National agricultural partners have, are in often cases underfunded and not functioning very well. So the CGIAR will also be more effective in its own activities if it has strong local partners to work with. So for that reason, we're emphasizing the need for capacity development of the national and regional NARs, and in Africa in particular, but in other places in the world as well. And then the last bullet point here is that encouraging developing country governments to invest more in their own R&D and extension systems. For Africa, this means reviving support for honoring the Maputo declarations that African governments signed up to over 10 years ago. Unfortunately, only about 5 or 6 African governments have met their Maputo declaration commitments. So part of this is getting greater accountability out of national governments themselves, as well as trying to create incentives for the international partners to devote more to capacity development. Next slide, please. You can see that sub-Saharan Africa has invested relatively little in agricultural R&D, regardless of whether you compare that In absolute terms, in the upper left quadrant, as a percentage of GDP in the upper left, or per farm worker or per hectare of cropland. There's really a need for Africa to step up on this. Next slide, please. And you can see that this is translated into kind of a lack of productivity growth in Africa compared to the rest of the world. So there really is a strong R&D component to Africa's continued sluggish growth in yields. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my last slide before we turn it over to the panelists. Madison, can you, okay, the first one is there's of the other priority policy areas, improving the capacities of national and regional tertiary education systems in developing countries. So if you think about it, where do the scientists working in Nepal or working in Ghana, where do they come from? Well, they're products of their own university systems. 99% of them are going to be educated in their own countries. So developing stronger university systems will be an important component of raising the caliber of competent people in the national systems. Second point is expanding weather and early warning information systems to more accurately predict and respond to emerging shocks. Number three is mobilizing the investment capital, and there will be a lot of investment capital required to create climate resilient systems, largely by the private sector through an improved policy and enabling environment. I wanted to call out the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's great that African countries have ratified largely this agreement for free trade. And now comes the hard part of actually implementing it. But once the implementation happens, this will really expand the market for smallholder farmers in Africa by bringing their neighboring countries less barriers to trade in the region. And this is just an example of how policy and trade issues can really promote the investment by the private sector to make their own investments in productivity growth and food systems and climate resilient food systems. Okay, improving the enabling environment. And the point here on number 4 is to support locally led approaches, such as the ones that are being led by the African Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institutes. And then the last point here is to facilitate interministerial coordination. Climate smart and resilient actions cut across so many sectors. It's not just the ministries of agriculture and finance, it's environment, land, natural resources, energy. It really requires a coordinated response across many different sectors of government. So with those points, I will now conclude and would like to turn to the panel. And let me start with Kofi Boa, a farmer in Ghana. I'm really glad you're here. Welcome, Kofi. Let me put it to you, do African governments understand the importance of investing in agricultural R&D and how central it is to achieving many of their own national policy objectives? Kofi.
Thom, thank you very much for this nice paper, and I'm so happy to be part of this panel. Yes, for sure. No doubt about it. African governments fully understand the value of investing in research and development in agriculture. But you see, our biggest problem has been the commitment from our governments. And I was so happy when you touched on encouraging African governments to invest locally in our own research and development. This is very, very important. You also talked about the Maputo Declaration. And if it is anything to go by, that is where we have fears. People understand at the time, 2003 in Maputo, they knew that they needed so much to invest in agricultural research and development to uplift agricultural transformation in Africa. And they made pledges. But back home, looking back several years, it is just about 7 out of 50 countries that have upheld this commitment. And so, I mean, all throughout these years, what has happened? But we sit home and criticize developed countries for not upholding commitments from COPs. Surely, we, even whoever, the government fully understand that. But you see, my biggest concern, my personal fear is that we are talking about a global issue now, investing in climate resilient processes. And you see, in situations where we have our personal problems, how much commitment have we had from our governments in solving, in investing heavily in this? And now the fear is that climate change is a global issue, and the developed countries are not sitting down. They are doing whatever, investing, doing research and development. And my fear is that we may sit home, fold our hands, and think that whatever the developed world is doing will spill over to us. And therefore, because it is a global issue, we will sit and let them do it, and we benefit from whatever they do, which to me would be very disastrous. Because following from Maputo, what prevented us all these years from getting in there? And so the biggest issue is that we need at the regional level and at the national level. Going from the national level to the regional level, we have to hold our governments accountable for failures to invest in research and development in agriculture, especially at this time when we are looking at climate change.
Great. Kofi, thank you. I'll come back to you on some of the points that you raised. Let me turn to Ann Vaughan. The USAID has a couple of exciting initiatives called CASI and Prepare. Can you tell us a little bit about how those programs are going to be supporting smallholder farmers in developing countries adapt to climate? Thank you.
Sure. No, thanks so much. Apologies, I have a bit of a cold, so I sound pretty rotten right now. But I wanted to maybe just pick up real briefly on what Kofi was saying and start with the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate initiative, and then would love to talk about Prepare and CASI. So exactly in line with what Kofi was saying, the need to have greater investment by countries to invest in their own agricultural R&D for climate smart food systems is pretty significant. And the US government is very committed to helping support these efforts too, and has made commitments over the years to increase our research and development for climate smart ag food systems, in line with an initiative led with huge kudos to the USDA and State Department, and with USAID supporting and other agencies supporting. The US government worked with the UAE to launch the Agricultural Innovation Mission for Climate at last year's COP, and that this year's COP just now had additional countries join and additional commitments made, including USAID announcing our continued investment in the CG system with another 43 million towards climate smart ag food systems, which we think is really important for all the reasons you've just laid out. But within the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, we're also encouraging other countries to join and increase their own investments in order to become part of the Aim4C partner and club as a country. Is you should be commit to increasing your own investments in climate smart food systems. So really wanted to second Kofi's call for action, and one way to sort of do that is to also to join Aim4C. And work with this coalition of governments and also private sector partners and university partners and NGOs to try to create a better platform and collaboration around how we can make sure we prepare for a much warmer and more volatile future. And then I'm really glad you also brought up Prepare and CASI. So two more acronyms. Apologies for all the acronyms, but Prepare stands for the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience. And is a rather historic commitment by the U.S. administration and government to support adaptation needs, which we know are so important for smallholder farmers, who, as Thom, as you in the paper layout, are under some severe pressures because of climate change. So under Prepare, which was also launched at last year's COP by President Biden, and then we've just launched an action plan that I'll drop in the chat for folks to highlight. It brings together 19 different U.S. government agencies and highlights over 60 different actions we'll take to help with early warning systems, which the paper mentions is really critically important also for smallholder farmers, especially I would say in Africa, where about 60% of African farmers don't have access to early warning, or people across the continent don't have access to early warning systems. So one of the pillars of Prepare is on knowledge, which includes climate information systems, early warning systems. The second pillar of Prepare talks about plans and programs on how do we help support countries with their NAPs and NDCs, and I'll talk about a bit more in a second. And the last pillar talks about how we can help mobilize more adaptation finance, which we know is especially needed. And one of the things that was exciting to come out of COP was to see the amount of energy around food systems at this last COP just last week or week and a half ago now, to try to push more funding for, especially for smallholder farmers and farmers, to get climate finance off the sidelines and actually helping to support smallholder farmers have more climate smart practices. So that's sort of a quick overview of Prepare, and I'll drop more information in the chat. But as one of USAID's contributions to Prepare in the second pillar I noted around plans and programs, we also launched CASI, which stands for the Comprehensive Action for Climate Change Initiative. It started last year as part of a request from the African Union to give more support to countries in helping implement their NAPs, or National Adaptation Plans, and NDCs, and National Determined Contributions, so your NAPs and NDCs. And what we thought was particularly great about CASI, and in line with the localization efforts that you talked about, Thom, is we're working with a lot of African partners, including Academia 2063 and RENIPRI, which you already mentioned, which are coalitions of a lot of academic institutions and policy institutions that are already doing some great work on the continent to help with policy efforts. So we've launched these efforts, which we think are already collaborating with governments and civil society to try to advance better plans and programs to help make sure we've got the right plans in place and governments have a clear guide path into how they can help adapt to climate change and help mitigate where possible, especially around food systems too. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Ann. Okay, before I go to Deissy, I'd like to encourage all of you who are viewing to please feel free to submit comments or questions, and I'll be happy to pull some of those out as time permits. So anyway, feel free to drop any of those in the chat. Let me go to Deissy. Welcome. Deissy's calling in from, or joining us from Colombia. Deissy, I guess the question I'd like to put to you is, what are the implications of not prioritizing climate adaptation in Latin America in particular? Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Thomas, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. And yes, I think based on following all of the interventions before, I think that climate adaptation needs to be a priority across Latin America and other regions. Rural populations in the region are facing each time more climate extreme events and also more intense droughts and floods. And these are putting deep and sustained negative impacts in those populations and their livelihoods. And usually countries don't have the capacity to recover and the resources needed to put into the local territories to recover from those climate extreme events and those damages related to climate. And this situation adds to the historical vulnerability of rural population. So it's not only climate, but it's the historic poverty lines and the other issues that we have across the region and in other regions as well. So all of these combined triggered migration dynamics, for example. If we don't focus on climate adaptation, those migration dynamics that we have in the region, especially in Central America and Guatemala and Honduras, for example, will increase. And migration is not always an option that they have between a number of options. It's just because they have to, because their livelihoods are not are threatened by all of these dimensions that I just mentioned. So here we refer to climate-related risks, which are these systemic risks that emerge from the interactions that we are having at the ecological, social, and political economic dimensions. Investing in climate adaptation, tailor-made solutions together with local stakeholders so that we develop different alternatives raising from the ground, but putting science and research together with the knowledge of local population, we can definitely support and increase resilience of the climate of this agri-food systems at the local level. This not only will enhance the livelihoods of the rural population, but also increase the possibility to become in Latin America as a food and global breadbasket across the globe. So this is something that we really should consider in terms of putting climate adaptation on the front. And I think also based on your report and your paper, Thomas, capacity enhancement is essential for achieving climate adaptation that is sustained over time and that give tools to farmers and local actors to really manage the risks that they have in terms of climate variability.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deissy. Appreciate it. So there's a couple of questions that have been put in the chat. I'd like to go back to Kofi right now. Kofi, your point was that African governments understand and appreciate the importance of helping smallholder farmers adapt to climate change, but it's a matter of commitment is really the issue. And I'm tempted to ask you, what concretely could the international community do to encourage African governments to invest more in climate smart food systems in their own countries? And would the suggestion or the proposal that Stephanie Mercier put in the chat about using matching funds to sort of encourage governments to do that, is that something that you feel could be effective? Anyway, eager to hear your views, Kofi.
Yeah, definitely. In fact, even without coming through to that, that is exactly what I was going to say. That you see, what is going to commit us? What is going to, so to say, get us to move forward? If we do not have any commitment, that is where the problem lies. And so, for me, committing our own resources to research and development at the local level is so crucial. And we have partners from the developed countries willing to help. But the way things have happened over years, I will seriously advocate for matching grant to such an extent that without it, there is no commitment. That alone will show the commitment from our side as to what we want to do for ourselves. And therefore, I would expect to see a substantial amount. In fact, I'm so happy that a lot of these things are happening and the developed world recognizing that we cannot stand on our own in sub-Saharan Africa and several other developing countries, and that they want to help. But you see, we have to show that we appreciate the support, and we have to show that, yes, this support is going to be so valuable to us, without which we cannot do it. And therefore, what is our take? And so I would expect that the developed world wanting to support us should be very strict on our part of the commitment, and which can only be manifested in the matching grant.
Okay, Kofi, thank you. Thank you for that. So here's a question from Michelle Lerner. Are climate early warning systems coordinating with nutrition-centered early warning efforts such as FuseNet? Ann, would you be willing to take that one?
Sure, I can try. Great question. And that's actually something I think we did include. There's a the public facing action plan I put in the chat. I can't remember if we put that in the public or if it's in our kind of in the weeds work planning that we're doing for Prepare, but it's certainly come up as something that we need to be focusing more on nutrition to make sure we're thinking about the impacts of climate change on the food that we're able to grow. The nutritional quality of food could decrease significantly. There's been some really disturbing studies, or study out of West Africa, where I think it's losing several years of development and advancement we've had on even things like stunting has been decreased because of climate change. So we have to take nutrition and climate change seriously. And that's something I think in 2023 are excited to, folks are interested in working on this, let us know so we can go into COP20 through next year's COP more forward leaning on that. But per your question on the FuseNet and nutrition specifically, let me dig in and I can respond in the chat a little bit to make sure I get my answer right. But I know it's something we're certainly looking at closely because it is of such concern. And I would say especially in certain locale that's having really, as I think Kofi or maybe it was Thom mentioned, we've got 5 consecutive droughts going on in the Horn right now that are having huge food security implications that we're working on address. The U.S. has been a significant donor and responder to this right now, but do need to make sure we're building resilience and looking and tying the early warning systems into nutrition. So give me a second and I'll respond in chat too with a little bit more info. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thanks. We'll come back to you on that one, Ann. There's a couple of questions here that have come about the role of young entrepreneurs and how can they be brought in and supported by the international community. There's another question about has there been much progress on increasing the number of female ag extension agents and efforts by male agents to engage with female farmers? Very important issues. Deissy or Kofi, would either of you like to address either of those questions?
Okay. I mean, talking about the young entrepreneurs, in fact, for us in Sub-Saharan Africa, this is key to our agricultural transformation and development. Now, what has happened is that you see the very aged still going up and down produce. But look at the age group and you get to see that majority of these smallholder farmers are 50, 60 plus. And so what has happened is that, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, agriculture has been placed in a situation where people look at it as a degraded profession. And we surely have to uplift the image of agriculture. And so if we continue to do things this way, we as farmers, pioneer farmers, carry ourselves, downgrade ourselves, what incentive is there for the young entrepreneur to come in? And that is an area where personally, myself and my group, we are doing everything possible to entice the youth to come in, because without their strength, Sub-Saharan Africa, no matter what, in whatever investment we put in, because you invest in the people, you build, you uplift research and development, knowledge is generated, but you have to have people on the ground to utilize the knowledge to produce an output. And if they are people who are so weak, what is the value of that investment? And so enticing the youth to come in there is so important. And then we really have to know what is it that will bring them in. And so we have to show the value of agriculture to these young people. And when we do that, for sure, there will be a very big value for whatever investment that comes from outside and our commitment on the part of the investment. That to be something very laudable.
Okay, thanks, Kofi. Deissy, would you like to take a shot at either or both of those questions?
Sure. And I totally agree with Kofi. And one of the things that we are aiming at the CGIAR through the initiative, one of the initiatives that we have in Latin America called AgriLac Resiliente, is putting gender, youth, and social inclusion at the center of climate adaptation and mitigation. And it is not just focusing on some activities related to women or youth, but all of the efforts need to be designed so that young people and young farmers are able to put their ideas and to carry out their view and their initiatives within the process of enhancing resilience to climate change and adaptation. We have a component, a work package on digital agriculture, and we are focusing on enabling young farmers and young entrepreneurs to collaborate to design innovation that can bring and can boost productivity in the agricultural sector, together with the researchers and at the local institutions, but also with us at the international level. So I think that putting them at the center of the design of the different interventions that we're doing and enhance their capacity, we definitely have a sustained impact in terms of climate adaptation and resilience.
Okay, great. Deissy, while we have you with right now, could I ask you to address this question? Do you feel that the scientists in the CG system, do they have incentives? Are they given the incentives to try to work to build the capacity of their national partners and local partners on the ground?
Definitely. We are now assessed by the impact we generate in the local, on the ground, in the territories that we work with. And we cannot do that without the local partners. We need them to be empowered with the knowledge that we have, but also embrace a collaborative approach to create knowledge together with us, because they have a lot of knowledge that we don't, and combine those type of knowledge, we can definitely develop tailor-made solutions that really respond to the needs they have. It's not one solution, it's a variety of solutions that we need to develop. And in each territory, in each country will be different. Not you cannot replicate the exact same technologies or solutions in one place or another. Their communities change, their cultural values, their way to do things, their social networks are different. And we as scientists in the CGIAR are being incentivized to really develop those capacities and then show the impact that our research can do in them. So it's not about us, it's just putting and developing the capacities with the local stakeholders. And they are the ones that are close to the farmers. They are the ones that are close to the communities, and we need to work with them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, thank you. So there's two questions that came in. One is from Anthony Bafoboni, and the other one right after is from Joseph Kwanzaa. And I think that both of those, I'd like to put those to Kofi. The questions are, what can be done to make some technologies developed over the years with assistance from international agencies available or more available to smallholder farmers? It seems smallholders do not widely use the technologies developed over the years. That's number one. And the second one by Joseph Kwanzaa is the same question I had in my mind when I heard you answer the previous question, which is beyond matching funding. What do we do to get developing countries to commit more to R&D in climate change as a sustainable path to development? You be willing to take those, Kofi?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
I mean, first we're looking at smallholder farmers using technologies, and this is where we especially, we seriously need the contribution of our national research development systems to partner with international research development systems. If we have situations where technologies are developed from outside, I mean, the setting is different, recommendations are made. But one thing that we have to understand is that our farmers are not the type of people that you can easily ask to go on the net to assess innovation technologies and apply. And they cannot even, peer review papers mean nothing to them. So in situations like this, we need our national research systems to sit up in terms of doing a lot of this adaptive research. I mean, the basic research, fine. That is where we get to understand the science of whatever we're doing. But when it comes to the level of application, especially at the smallholder farmer level, how to adapt whatever technology to the specific conditions are so much needed. And this is where the contribution of our national systems will be so important. And so as the science is being developed, then at the local level, committing ourselves in terms of putting in investment to develop research, adaptive research and extension systems to respond to the specific needs of the smallholder farmers is so important. We are talking about beyond matching grant. Fine, that is true. I keep saying the matching grant should be the very first thing, because my colleague, my Ghanaian counterpart colleague who is asking this question knows so well that for most of us here, everything that comes free is taken for nothing. And so if we are having 100% investment from outside to do anything at all, I mean, it's just like it has come, it will come. Mm-hmm. And that is the problem. And so all that we are seeing here is that for several of these initiatives, there's no continuity. And so in most cases, we start from point one. And so beyond matching grant, we have to be moving forward to such an extent that if we had a grant to look at certain adaptive processes in line with climate change, we should be burdened on that rather than all the time coming back to start from point one. And so matching grant is there, but we have to be looking at moving forward and burden on whatever we have done. We are so much I don't know what is happening. So much being spent getting from, we never ever get from A to Z. We get from A, B, C, end it, and we are back starting. So we have to have policies. We have to have long-term policies, mm-hmm, so that whatever investment we get, especially with regards to climate change and adaptation processes, will build on that. But if we do not have any long-term national policy, then matching grant or whatever will not be of value to any initiative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I very much appreciate your point about how international technologies, if I were to respond to that question about why has there been such little uptake of technologies developed internationally, it would be exactly along the lines you said, that there's such heterogeneity in soil conditions, agroecology, rainfall, elevation, market conditions, and all of these technologies really need to be adapted to these local conditions, and that the CG system is not able to do that. It requires a strong national partner to scale those technologies out and to adapt them to the micro variability that smallholder farmers are in. Even in Ghana, I know that there's something like 10 or 11 different regimes stretching from, coastal areas to the humid tropics and then to arid areas in the north. Now, there's a question by Judith Payne about, she's saying that we need more successful approaches in extension, innovative extension models to get proven technologies applied and scaled. And she would say that our emphasis should not be on more research on innovations. Agree? The floor is open for any of the three of you to come in on that one.
Sure,
Yes.
I could jump in. I think it kind of riffs a little bit off of what Kofi was just saying also too. I think we do need to focus on the uptake, and that also works in bringing in the private sector. And making sure that the private sector is able to push out and innovate innovations. But I think even before that is making sure that farmers are front and center in the first ones, and it's farmer preferred seeds. And a lot of the work that our innovation labs are doing is working closely with farmers before you even start the research to make sure that it is being led by farmer preference. Because if you don't like how something tastes, you're not going to plant it. I mean, the basic 101 things like that we need to make sure we don't ever skip. And I think we definitely learned a lot and made some really exciting improvements on that end. But we still do really agree with Judith about the need to push things out. But I would say some of the challenges that we are facing, we don't know, we need to be planning for the future. And that means continue to invest in the innovation and research now for some of the challenges that we know in a, God forbid, a 2-degree warmer world that will face, that will need different seeds for the future than what we have right now. And that the path and the length of time it can take for a product to get to from initial research to deployment and actual uptake by farmers can be pretty long. So we have to do both, and we have to do both really well. So appreciate the interests. And I would just say Stephanie also had a good question in the chat too about insurance, which is an increasing topic, I think, in the climate community. And we have a really good innovation lab out in California that looks at how we can use insurance to help build resilience for farmers. But you need to do, farmers can be risk averse because it could be your only seed that you have. And don't have a lot of extra capital floating around. So we need to think about how we sequence and layer and do a variety of different interventions and support systems to be able to make smallholders thrive. That can include everything from digital services to social safety nets to making sure that there is index insurance when a crop does fail. I'll stop there, but I'll put a link in because it's a really neat lab that does some of this work that would like to share with folks. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Ann. Deissy, did you want to come in on this question too?
Yeah. I just wanted to agree with Ann. I mean, we need to do both, and also we not only need to focus on the tangible physical technologies, but also on social innovations. And I have a particular example on that in terms of how an approach of working together at the local level in order to discuss local agroclimatic information is a way to really bring tailored, local and timely information for farmers to make decisions on how to manage their crops. So we have this is an approach called local technical agroclimatic committees. These committees are being implemented in 11 countries in Latin America, and they are led by local organizations together with national institutions, ministries of agriculture, environment, meteorological services, and the local institutions on the ground, so that they develop these local agroclimatic bulletins that are disseminated to farmers with specific recommendations on when to plant, what to plant, what could be the input requirements based on the weather and climate forecast that they will have in the following weeks and months. So that information is being deployed at a very local level and tailored to the needs of the farmers. But we really need to strengthen the capacity of the farmers to uptake and use that information. And I think that that's something that we need to focus also the investment on.
Right.
How we are able to enhance the capacity of farmers to use that information and to inform the decision-making processes on the crops and farming systems.
Good. Thank you, Deissy. Yeah, I always thought of research and extension as synergistic, that if you have a good extension system, but you don't have much to extend, then the extension system isn't going to be very impactful. Likewise, if you have a good research system but no extension, then you're not going to get to the farmers. So they seem to be synergistic to me. We're out of time. I'd love to continue on these points, but at this point, I want to thank the panelists, Deissy, Kofi, and Ann, for your really insightful comments, and I'll hand back to Katie Lee to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thom, and would echo our gratitude from Farm Journal Foundation to Ann, Kofi, and Deissy for joining us, as well as to you, Thom, for writing this paper and moderating this discussion, and everyone on this discussion who joined us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and you should have all received a link to the paper, which was formally launched today. And hopefully you'll be able to take a look at it, and we welcome your feedback and the ongoing discussion and engagement from all of you. Just to close our discussion, obviously this conversation was focused on the issue of climate change and how smallholder farmers are adapting, the issues they're facing, the solutions to help support them in that effort. We heard, from local partners like the Center for No-Till Agriculture, the work that Kofi is leading there, what Deissy and her colleagues are doing at the CGIAR, as well as donor governments like the U.S. government, the initiatives that the U.S. is leading and engaging on, like Aim for Climate, Prepare, CASI, and the Feed the Future Innovation Labs. Within this context, we discussed the importance of several particular issues, including obviously research, innovation, and extension that responds to smallholder farmer needs specifically. We talked about the importance of investing in early warning systems and informative tools for smallholder farmers to help them adapt. We talked about the importance of the commitment, to be very clear on the terminology, the commitment of donor and country governments alike, and systems to engage in these efforts and to focus on funding, in particular, in creative ways to create incentives for that engagement. I'll say in the U.S., we'll be watching closely how Congress acts on appropriations in the coming weeks for the remainder of fiscal year 2023, since we know funding is so crucial. With wearing my government affairs hat, so I'll throw that in the mix. We also talked about local partners and the importance of capacity building of NARS and other systems, as well as engaging with the private sector. Nutrition, I think, as a whole other area we could dive into more deeply. And I look forward to engaging with all of you in the lead up to the next COP to deepen our focus on the linkages between climate and nutrition specifically. We talked about youth. We talked about the importance of gender sensitive programming and engagement on these issues. Just such a rich discussion. And again, just want to thank everybody for joining and participating. And again, look forward to working with you all in the future. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.